Hi, didn't notice you there. My name is Kelly, and today we will be discussing the fascinating world of bet hedging. Before we get too ahead of ourselves, let's refresh on some background information. Reproduction is necessary for the survival and development of all vertebrate species. With worsening environmental challenges leading to more variability between seasons and years, it is key that organisms must strategize reproductive behaviors to better adjust to the unpredictable. Bet hedging is a strategy used among groups ranging from birds to rodents that demonstrates incredible adaptability to overcome ever-changing adversities. But what is bet hedging? Let's get into it, shall we? Many people are unaware of what bet hedging actually is. Even scientists. Just over 100 studies have been published researching the topic, and conflicting information makes it difficult to pinpoint a clear description. So, with that said, a working definition of bet hedging is efforts to decrease variation in fitness so as to increase net fitness, as an adaptive method to reproduce in variable environments. In simple terms, bet hedging is a strategy used by organisms to try to give at least some of their young a chance in unpredictable environments. Rather than breed offspring that are specially adapted to a certain environment, the goal is to create offspring with more general traits, so they can be resilient when faced with a broad range of climates and issues. This is what is meant by decreased variance in fitness to increase net fitness, as instead of planning for many different young that can each thrive in certain settings, it is less risky to have babies that might not thrive in every environment per se, but they can survive in every environment that they will meet. For example, let's say that a bird is living in an area that experiences dry and wet seasons randomly. If it will have offspring, it might choose to breed with a dry specialized or wet specialized mate. In doing so, they can produce offspring that are very successful in their respective season. However, when the environment changes, the offspring are at risk of not only suffering, but potentially dying. If the bird were to strategize by bet hedging, they may create generalized young that can both survive and reproduce in dry and wet seasons. It may take a few generations to reach this, or it might be immediate. Regardless, it is used as a way to minimize risk by not breeding only according to weather in places where it tends to change. Bet hedging does not refer to one specific mode of reproduction, rather it pertains to how energy is invested into procreation strategies. Zygotes are cheap, however offspring are expensive in many ways. Therefore, it is extremely important that energy be used wisely, especially when uncertainty is certain. To do so, there are 3 types of bet hedging identified. That is, conservative bet hedging, play it safe. Diversified bet hedging, don't put all eggs in one basket. And adaptive coin flipping, choose a strategy at random from a fixed distribution. Conservative bet hedging refers to an organism focusing all energy into one strategy, to minimize risk of brood loss and to not push boundaries when a successful tactic has already been adopted. True conservative bet hedging is rare, and birds make up the majority of the identified cases. In context, there are only 12 distinct proposals counted. This just goes to show how incredible conservative bet hedging practices are, like those of the Vertebrates, commonly known as the coal tit. That was the chirp of a coal tit, a bird with a distinctive grey back, black cap, and white patch at the back of its neck. It has a small, skinny bill which helps it feed in conifers, but compared to the blue or great tits, they are at a size disadvantage. Coal tits were documented to have used a conservative bet hedging strategy where they laid early, because first hatched eggs have a greater chance at survival over later hatched young, considering they have more time to develop and become strong for winter. But what is so special about this? Other birds in the same area also planned the same way, however you could say that coal tits are more faithful to this method. Over multiple years, they consistently laid eggs in April, despite fluctuations in temperature and food availability. Other birds in the same study would lay early, but would also delay birth until they were comfortable with the resources and average climate. This conservative strategy proved to be optimal for coal tits to ensure a larger body mass of young to hedge against trying climates. That being said, there is risk of offspring hatching in inhabitable cold snaps or without adequate nutrient availability. However, over time it leads to surviving generations with successful traits to continue to reproduce, passing along the same phenotypes. Diversified bet hedging, on the other hand, consists of an organism investing in multiple strategies consecutively to spread risk over different phenotypes. While this may cause more variation compared to the other methods, the diversified strategy is intended to weed out the offspring with unsuitable traits, while others with different traits have the chance to survive and reproduce. The Myocastocoipus, more commonly known as the copiu or nutria, are an example of such vertebrates that participate in diversified bet hedging. Copiu are large, semi-aquatic rodents that were originally brought to the United States for their fur. When the nutria fur market collapsed, thousands of them escaped or were released into the wild. While copiu devour weeds and overabundant vegetation, they also destroy native aquatic vegetation, crops, and wetland areas. Nutria actively demolishing their habitats while also facing rising sea levels, making their environment increasingly variable. Thus, despite high reproductive levels, the survival of the species is dependent on a reproductive strategy to avoid the deaths of too many progenies. Female copiu were documented to have selectively aborted smaller litters and female-dominant litters, only to become pregnant and carry to term the next set of embryos that were primarily male and/or large. The diverse methods of selective abortion, as well as phenotypic choosiness of both male and large offspring, is valuable for this species, as energy allocation into members with either of these traits helps to minimize risk of resource depletion with more possible pregnancies from female litters. Also, a larger copiu is more likely to overcome the habitat problems they are facing. As worst comes to worst, they are able to swim farther away and degrade the next water bank. Lastly, adaptive coin flipping is an interesting guesswork method in which an organism will pick a different plan annually that may be loosely based on the state of the environment during breeding. Regardless of whether the change happens between broods or years, at its core adaptive coin flipping includes a distinct set of reproduction options that an organism decides from at random. It is almost like flipping a coin, and letting whatever side it falls on be the reproductive strategy for the next generation. This strategy was documented in Nothobranchius furseri, more commonly known as killifish, where differing winter climates forced female fish to choose between laying developing eggs or burying embryos for diapause. Genotypes coded in some part for the length of time spent in diapause, also. Diapause is a state of developmental arrest, meaning that embryos were basically frozen in time as a hedge against the cold. The killifish impulsively selected their strategy for each year but never strayed from either option, making this behavior a perfect example of adaptive coin flipping. There you have it, the three methods of bet hedging: conservative bet hedging, diversified bet hedging, and adaptive coin flipping. Each one shows unique practices that different organisms developed based on their environmental stress. Coal tits laying eggs early in the season, nutria selectively aborting females, and killifish burying embryos is just scratching the surface of the incredible evolutionary adaptations that vertebrates can come to. As a recap on what bet hedging actually is, let's remember that it can be described as efforts to decrease variation in fitness so as to increase net fitness, as an adaptive method to reproduce in variable environments. This is to say that adaptations will evolve over time and consistency to the method of choice, as this is the only appropriate response to overcome changing conditions. As a note, because bet hedging traits maximize geometric mean fitness of their offspring across generations but do not maximize the expected fitness within a generation, when observed over short time frames, bet hedging adaptations appear to be detrimental even under normal or average conditions. It takes time to see true results, and it is extremely unfortunate that there has been so little documentation and evidence of bet hedging to date. Hopefully, as we progress scientifically, we are able to allocate more attention to truly learning the depths of bet hedging. Who knows? Even humans might eventually need to resort to bet hedging as climate change progresses. All in all, bet hedging is an extremely fascinating topic that I am glad to have shared with you all. I hope you learned something new.